Well, welcome. This is Dr. Geraldine Brosfield, and I'm happy to welcome you to our webinar today. It's another Wednesday and another hump day. I don't know how everybody's week's going, but yesterday I was like, isn't it Thursday already? It feels like it's been a long week where we've packed many things into the first couple days of the week already. So whatever your week is like this week, I hope it's going well and that you take some time to do something for yourself each day. At yoga a couple weeks ago, one of the comments that Jane had on a whiteboard was, what are you doing for your self-care today? Which I thought was a great question that each of us can ask each day. So our topic today is thyroid, and this is an area that is so often confusing to people and is honestly not as difficult to manage as it may seem to be, but a lot of times that's because it's something that isn't fixed with one change. It often takes multiple adjustments and multiple changes over time to help a person have normal thyroid levels and really get their thyroid to an area that is a good zone for them. So let me just get us all started here. I'm actually just going to mute all of us except for me. And then we'll get started. Kind of like we did a week or two ago when I asked if there were topics that people wanted to have a discussion about. I am always open to new topics. Today, thyroid was one that sort of hit the mark as far as a lot of people being interested in learning about thyroid care and how to optimize their thyroid. And I think otherwise, if there's something that comes up for you, please let us know if there's something that is a topic you would like for us to address. Kind of in the same format that we've done in the past, I'm going to move us over to PowerPoint and we'll make sure that our recording is set there. And we're working on trying to have each of these recordings up on our website and on Facebook. Sorry, not on our website, on Facebook until our website is live, so that you can review these talks at a later date. Well, welcome. We are gathered today for a webinar about thyroid function. We're going to try to bring some clarity to the discussion around thyroid and what you should know in order to have your best thyroid health and your best overall health. I'm Dr. Geraldine Brosfield at XO Health for people who want to be extraordinary, and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about the thyroid and what it does. What's the role of the thyroid in the body? I think many of us are aware that thyroid's really important, but we don't know why or what it does. And the other thing we're going to talk about is what goes wrong and what we can do about it. We're going to talk about how some of the tests are used to try to decipher what's going on and try to help you have some clarity if doctors are testing some of your basic function of your thyroid. And then what can you do? We're going to talk about treatments and strategies and trying to make sense of the different options and how to support your thyroid and thyroid function in your body. The thyroid gland is a little tiny gland. It's honestly maybe the size of a walnut. It's not really big. If you can see my throat, it's literally right under my fingers here. And when a doctor does a thyroid test for you, or if you were trying to feel your own thyroid, you'd want to not talk like I'm talking right now, but when you stop talking and swallow, you can feel your thyroid gland move up and down over your windpipe or over your trachea. And the thyroid should feel like there's a little bump that rises and falls under your fingers. It's shaped like a butterfly with a little central portion that's called the isthmus, and then the right side and the left side on either side of your trachea. And that gland is supposed to be, smooth and feel like a little bump under your fingers, but it shouldn't feel like there's hard nodules or pieces of almost like the consistency of a pencil eraser inside of it that you could tell were different than the rest of it. It should feel kind of uniform, where all of it feels kind of soft and like there's a little bump that moves up and down under your fingers. And I check thyroids with every one of our physical exams in the office, and most of the time the thyroid just feels like this little bump along the trachea, and there's no problem with that. there are people where sometimes you'll look at somebody and you'll think, man, they have some swelling in their throat. And that can often be some enlargement of the thyroid gland, and often will happen when the thyroid is trying to overwork and keep up with a need for more thyroid hormone in the body. Our thyroid hormone that's created from our thyroid gland impacts so many of our systems. In children, thyroid is really critical to growth. And so if you have a child who doesn't have thyroid, their bone plates will be impacted, the growth of their body will be impacted. And in adults, it has different ways that this shows up. And in fact, in many ways, has a lot of symptoms that go with thyroid that have to do with how well our metabolism is running. The easiest way for me to think about thyroid hormone and its impacts in the body are that if you have too much thyroid hormone, if you have a lot of it, it revs everything up. So in many ways, the feeling of too much thyroid hormone would be like having had 6 cups of coffee. So things like having palpitations and a rapid heart rate, or having diarrhea, or having really like hyped manic energy, weight loss. Sometimes loss of hair can actually go with either high or low thyroid, and then also elevated blood sugar and lowered blood cholesterol all go along with thyroid levels that are too high. When thyroid is too low, if you imagine kind of like you pulled the plug on somebody, or and I don't mean that like in the ICU sense, but like you drained them of energy. If you think of low energy and everything slowing down, that would be what happens with low thyroid hormone. So the heart rate gets lower, bowel motility slows down, and people will be more constipated. People's energy will be lower. Their metabolic rate will slow down and they will tend to gain weight. Hair will fall out. Blood sugar will be a little higher and more variable. And then cholesterol will tend to rise as well. So thyroid hormone is like it can rev us up or rev us down in our energy and in our metabolism symptoms. One of the quick ways that I would take a survey of myself or patients or anyone that you're thinking about with thyroid is there's 3 things that I kind of ask about. One is, how's going to the bathroom? If a person is constipated, that goes along with low thyroid function. It's not the only cause of constipation, obviously, but it is something I want to know. So constipation, the need for an afternoon nap, and whether or not the outer third of the eyebrows are getting thin or really minimal, those 3 things together are things that raise a big red flag for me about checking thyroid hormone in my patients, because those are all signs of low thyroid function. We kind of group disorders of the thyroid gland into 2 main groups. We think of hypothyroidism, and hypo means underactive thyroid or not enough thyroid hormone, and hyperthyroidism, which means an overactive thyroid. And the way these present are kind of different. Hypothyroidism tends to show up with people feeling like their energy is low, their weight is going up, they may be constipated, they may be losing hair, they may be severely fatigued. And that often is, in almost all cases, caused by an autoimmune reaction in the body. The most common one gets labeled Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but all of the autoimmune thyroid disorders are low thyroid hormone that has been impacted because the body has generally been super stressed in other ways over a period of time. Hyperthyroidism, where there's too much thyroid, where the thyroid gland is getting larger or is overproducing, happens when either there's a disease state, like a tumor growing in either the stimulating part of the brain or in the thyroid gland itself, or the thyroid responding to a perceived need for more thyroid hormone in the body. And then some medications can also cause our thyroid to rev up and make too much. So in this slide, a couple things. I'm going to go more in depth about the things that are factors that stimulate thyroid production and factors that inhibit thyroid production. But I want to just notice there in the middle, this diagram. If you imagine that our brain sends a message to the thyroid gland, this little diagram is showing what gets made from the thyroid gland. And I'm going to go into this in a little more detail because when we have T4, which is made from our thyroid gland, it has to be converted to T3 in order to be active in our system. And one of the things to just notice is that when we have active T3 in our system, sometimes it's effective and sometimes it isn't. And I want to talk about those variations so that you know this information and know what to do about it. So just to label some of these hormones, and then I'll show us a diagram again. Thyroid stimulating hormone, or it's called TSH. So if you were looking at your own lab order, TSH is the test that is tested probably 99% of the time for thyroid. And in some ways, this is one of the spots that I have a real frustration with Western medicine. In Western medicine, as physicians, we're usually taught to just only check a TSH. And that's kind of like smelling the air for smoke to see if there was a house burning in the neighborhood rather than actually looking to see if there was a house on fire. TSH is a brain hormone. It's made in our pituitary gland, and it is what I call the megaphone hormone. It is not thyroid hormone. It's a stimulatory hormone. And so it's the messenger that your brain sends to your thyroid gland to tell it to make more thyroid or that it doesn't have to work as hard. So I say it's kind of like this. The brain has a sensory mechanism to check and see if you need thyroid hormone. We call it a feedback loop. And then it sends TSH, this hormone, like a megaphone. And TSH goes to the thyroid and says, come on down there, make more thyroid hormone. And if that TSH is high, it's because the brain is overworking or yelling louder, trying to get the thyroid to respond. So a high TSH means that your thyroid function is low. And that's often one of the confusing things about interpreting thyroid hormone. So a high TSH means low thyroid production. The thyroid gland itself will make T4 or thyroxine, and total T4, or if you get a blood test that's just labeled T4, it means the total amount of T4. Some of it's bound to protein that carries it around, and some of it is free floating in the bloodstream and able to be used. So a T4 level is reflective of how much hormone your thyroid gland is making. In order for you to use T4, it has to get converted to T3, and T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. And so that sequence of the thyroid stimulating hormone being sent like a message to the thyroid gland, which makes T4, that then gets converted to T3, is really the pathway that's supposed to happen with our thyroid function. There's one other test that we call reverse T3 that I want to just talk about also because it gives us a clue if this whole process is working correctly. And when we look at the process of the thyroid conversion happening, where the message gets from the brain to the thyroid and then the T4 gets made into T3, there are a whole bunch of other players in the system that are really important. And those include these vitamins and minerals. So iron, iodine, tyrosine, zinc, selenium, vitamins C, D, and E, and the B vitamins are all really important cofactors for that thyroid process to function normally. So this drawing is how I draw this out in the office. So I'm going to talk it through again because it's what I just said, but I'm going to state it as I sort of point to the points along the way of this conversion. So if our brain makes TSH, and that's the thing I called the megaphone, it's the messenger that goes to your thyroid gland, TSH stimulates your thyroid to make T4. Now, if you're taking Synthroid or levothyroxine, this is what you're taking. You're taking T4 right here. And probably 90% of Americans, if they take a thyroid medicine, are taking levothyroxine or Synthroid, and they're taking this T4 right here. So once you put this T4 into the system, it has to get converted over, let me go back. it has to get converted over to T3 because T3 is the active form that can go out to your cells and then get carried into the nucleus. So the interesting thing is these little enzymes that are along the way between T4 and T3 are dependent on zinc, selenium, and iodine. And so if you don't have enough zinc, selenium, and iodine, this has a huge blockade right here. And instead of converting T4 to T3, it'll go in the trash. So trash is what I call the reverse T3, just to help it stay straight in my own head, is when the reverse T3 is starting to rise and getting up into the teens or higher, I know that this body is not efficiently converting T4 into T3. The other thing about zinc, selenium, and iodine is that once we've made T3, it needs carriers to carry it into the nucleus of our cells. And those little carriers are zinc, selenium, and iodine. And so it's really, really important for thyroid function that we have adequate minerals, and specifically zinc, selenium, and iodine. So what happens if there's sort of a block because either I don't have enough of those minerals or my enzyme using those minerals is not converting T4 to T3 very well? Well, then this trash can gets full of reverse T3, and reverse T3 competes on the cells because it looks a lot like T3, but it's not the active form. It'll sit on the same receptors that are supposed to have T3 on them, but it's not active. And so it'll even more sort of block the action of whatever active T3 I have in my system because of the buildup of the trash sitting around blocking the active form of T3. So once again, TSH, the brain hormone, tells your thyroid to make T4. T4 is supposed to get converted into T3 using zinc, selenium, and iodine. And if that conversion process is not happening, you'll build up a RT3 or a reverse T3. So the factors that will increase that formation of T3 being made from T4, we just mentioned zinc and selenium as well as iodine. Zinc and selenium happen to be the ones that tend to be our biggest deficiencies in our country. And there's a couple things you can do about that. One of the easy things to do is to eat Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts are really high in selenium, and so literally eating 2 Brazil nuts a day is a helpful thing to make sure you're getting your selenium into your body. And when I say Brazil nuts, I'm not talking about like a roasted in oil kind of Brazil nuts. They're best if you can just get a raw, fresh Brazil nut from an organic source or a health food store. But making sure that you're getting zinc and selenium daily will help you in converting your T4 into T3. The other things that help our cells be more able to take up the T3 are vitamin A, exercise, and zinc again. And so making sure that we're getting lots of the yellow vegetables that have vitamin A in them, like carrots and yellow squash and yellow peppers, for instance, as well as exercising, will help us with making sure we have these cofactors that make that translation or that conversion work well. The things that block that thyroid hormone production are kind of a list that sound like the standard American life, right? Stress, infection, trauma, radiation, some medications, autoimmune disease, fluoride, which interestingly enough actually is an antagonist to iodine. So if we have a lot of fluoride in our water or in our system, we won't use iodine very efficiently. And then toxins that can be either in pesticides or in our water or even in things like our larger fish sources like swordfish and tuna can have more mercury in them. That is a blockade to thyroid hormone production. In going to a very similar list that end up making that reverse T3 or the trash can get filled up with the thyroid form that's non-active and unable to be used, this list looks very similar to the list I just had up a moment ago about blocking or inhibiting thyroid hormones. So stress, trauma, low-calorie diets that put a body through a lot of stress because of extremely low caloric intake, inflammation, toxins, infections, and some medications all end up helping us fill the trash can instead of convert T4 over to T3, which is the active form of thyroid for our system. When we look at what tends to be the story behind almost every major disease in our country, we can back it up to lifestyle. And if we look at lifestyle, which includes things like our choices of our dietary intake, sleep and water and toxic environmental things, even if it's toxic relationships, for instance, all of those stressors, both physical and emotional and life stressors, end up building up a system that is really difficult, or a system that has difficulty making normal hormones. And so as we have more stress and toxins build in our body, we have an inflammatory response internally that then leads to disease. And this pathway holds true whether we're talking about high sugar intake and the cause of inflammation that can lead to heart disease. It holds true whether we're talking about diabetes. It also holds true when we're talking about thyroid dysfunction. And in some ways, I used to think that the statistic that said that a quarter of women will develop low thyroid function in their 40s, I thought that was about like weakness of our thyroid gland. And in reality, I think it's about the standard American lifestyle right now, where we expect ourselves to live at a pace of the ever-ready bunny and to manage a lot of emotional drama and trauma, as well as not really nurture ourselves. And when you put those pieces together, we'll tend to have high inflammation in our system and a propensity towards disease states. And thyroid is no different. And I often think that thyroid is also a real telltale sign about a person's stress level over time, that if stress has been really high over time, we'll start to have difficulty of the thyroid keeping up. So when I look at even one of the very simple things that I think does have a downstream effect on thyroid function, it's stress management. And this is just a fun little list if you want to print this page out from our Facebook page. In fact, I can post this as another post on our Facebook page. But doing things that decrease our stress and increase our being present in the current moment is actually a really good tactic to start managing our thyroid. Whether it's that you're going to dance or go for a walk or be with somebody that you like being with, or get to bed earlier, or just practice smiling. Many of you have heard me say that just literally this motion, whether it's that you lift your cheek and force yourself, even if you don't feel like smiling, that smiling motion of your face makes you make happy hormones in your brain and will help decrease depression. So same thing with anything we can do that minimizes stress. Even any of you that are in the midst of some really hard times potentially in your life right now, just grinning and bearing it for a couple minutes during your day where you move your face into a grin shape, even if you don't feel like it, can help you. One other note about relationships that I thought was pertinent, just because I've had several people this week who've had some really tough family situations going on. And this is just a depiction of one of the ways that we may have contacts in our phone so we can avoid people that we're trying to avoid that are negative. It's okay to, even if it's doctor's orders for your thyroid function, I give you permission to keep the negative people out of your life as much as possible, because all of those stressful interactions are things that can make your thyroid not function as well. I want to go back to, for a moment, the cofactors and the things that you can do that help you produce thyroid hormone more effectively. Most of us get iron in a daily diet, and when you look at iron's impact for thyroid, it's really important that you get iron. And if you happen to be a vegetarian, I just want to mention that there's some really good food sources for iron. We've tended to think that people that don't eat red meat would have more anemia or be low in iron. But it turns out there's a lot of really great food sources for iron that are other than meat. And in fact, red meat by itself is not particularly high in iron. It's a good source of iron, but really if you were going to aim for getting high iron from animal products, it would have to be liver, which most people don't tend to like. So if you're looking for other iron sources, one of the things that we've been using at our house is spirulina. And Robert did some research in trying to find the highest iron sources for people that are eating a vegetarian diet. Spirulina and algae happens to be really high in iron. Another source that's really great for iron is lentils. Lentils have high iron in them as well, and certainly things that are like nuts and seeds tend to have more iron in them also. If you're looking for iodine sources, one of our best sources of iodine is actually seaweed. So if you're someone who enjoys sushi or eats seaweed even as a snack, that's a good source of iodine. Iodine tends to be more elevated in any seafoods, and so that's a good source for a lot of people. And if you're someone who doesn't like seaweed or doesn't eat a lot of seaweed, you can do a couple things. You can supplement your iodine or take a mineral supplement that includes iodine. I have found several thyroid supportive mineral supplements that have iodine and zinc and selenium and some of the B vitamins all together in those supplements, and those are a good way to support your thyroid function. You can also buy at health food stores, you can buy kelp flakes that look kind of like a salt shaker with little tiny particles of kelp in them, and you can sprinkle those on your food and really not even impact the flavor. And so those kelp flakes are another good way to get iodine. Tyrosine is a amino acid, and it's basically going to be present if you're eating good protein sources, as well as zinc, then being a mineral that you would want to go ahead and supplement if you don't get it in any of your other vitamins. It's often in a multivitamin, but zinc and selenium are specific minerals that are helpful for the body, especially with thyroid. Like I said, with selenium, Brazil nuts are a good source, and even 2 a day, for instance, are a good source of selenium. Vitamin C, D, and E. Many of you know I'm sort of the vitamin D queen. I love for all of us to have vitamin D levels that are nice and high because they tend to help us lower cholesterol and decrease our chances of any cancers and improve brain function. And those vitamins also benefit thyroid production. And then our B vitamins are absolutely critical. If you're not taking a B complex, you may want to consider taking a B complex and look for one that has folate, not folic acid in it. And then another source of B vitamins that's great, animal products tend to have more B vitamins, but a source for vegetarians or vegans is nutritional yeast or brewer's yeast that often is good for adding flavor to things like popcorn, or if you're grilling tofu, it's good on that as well. When we look at the medication options for thyroid function, in many ways, a couple things about this that are some of the misconceptions that we've had. I certainly was raised as a doctor thinking that if you ever went on thyroid hormone, it was a for life kind of situation, that forever and always you would take thyroid hormone. And I've since realized that that's not the case, and had some patients who were able to get off of thyroid once they really healed their life. And what that means is that they were getting adequate sleep, and they were eating a really good diet, and they were at optimal weight, and their thyroid needs changed. They did not need the support or the life jacket form of support that we think of medications as being. But many, many times, and I will say, especially as we're doing cognoscopies in the office, low thyroid is detrimental for the brain. And so when we think about low thyroid having so many effects on our metabolism and on the way our body runs, this is one of the first areas that I want to normalize in any of my patients who are trying to get their cholesterol under control, or who are working on making sure their brain function is optimized so that we prevent Alzheimer's disease or cognitive decline. So if we were going to give you thyroid for a period of time while we worked on all the lifestyle pieces for you, many people will use levothyroxine, which is Synthroid, and there are also many generics of levothyroxine. Some people do better on the brand. I have a number of patients who we've tried to go to the generic and they don't do as well, and their blood levels are not as stable. If you're on Synthroid or levothyroxine, it's really worthwhile to make sure that we do a free T3 check and a reverse T3 check to see if you're converting your T4 into the active form of thyroid. There is another medication called Cytomel that is liothyronine, and that is T3. And so you can take a little bit of T4 and a little bit of T3 as two separate pills. There are also combination products that have those two hormones together so that you help support the body in having some of the active form and some of the T4 form that the body will convert as needed and choose its own level of how much thyroid conversion needs to happen. I tend to prefer using a combination product because it helps us make sure that we get the active form of thyroid elevated enough, even while we're trying to supplement things like zinc and selenium. But if you're on levothyroxine or Synthroid, that's fine as long as we've proven that you are converting it into the active form of thyroid. Many times the combination products, the T4 and the T3, can sort of come in and out of stock in pharmacies. It seems like because those are natural products, not synthetic products, they seem to be a little bit more dependent on market variables. And so recently I've had trouble getting Armour Thyroid for some of my patients, or certain doses are hard to obtain. Those are generally made either from beef or pork derivatives, and are a natural product that then is marketed under the name either Armour Thyroid or Nature Throid are the two common versions of that. And the doses are a little bit different on the combination products than they are on the Synthroid or levothyroxine. Levothyroxine tends to come in increments of 50, 75, there's an 87 actually, and then 100, 125. So you can move up from there, whereas the combination products tend to be intervals of 60. So there'll be, or intervals of 30 even, you could say. So 30, 60, 90, 120, 150 are more common versions on the combination products. And they're not equivalent. 160 milligrams of Armour Thyroid is not the same as levothyroxine. So you'd want a physician to help you in that ordering if you were switching from, say, a Synthroid over to a combination product. One of the other things about these choices on which ones we pick to use for people is that sometimes people will have either underlying allergies that will want to pick one of these that doesn't have products inside of it that the person is allergic to. Sometimes cornstarch is a binder in some of these pills, and some people don't do well if they have an allergy to corn. And so we'll pick a different medication because of that. The other thing is that some people literally just feel better on one or the other. And so I've had some people who do really well on Synthroid, and we don't change it as long as they're converting that over to T3. And I have other people who just can't tolerate or ever get to a good balance point on the Synthroid or levothyroxine, and then we find that they do really well on the Armour Thyroid or the Nature Throid. One other question I am asked often, and it's almost like it's a folklore kind of myth, is that you need to take your thyroid medicine on an empty stomach. And many people do literally set their alarm clock in the morning so they take their thyroid the medicine right beside their bed, and then get up and wait a half hour, 45 minutes before they have any other food or coffee in the morning. And in some ways, here's what I want to say about the empty stomach part of this. Whichever way you're going to take your medicine most consistently is how you should do it all the time. So if you're good with being consistent on taking your medicine on an empty stomach, then that's exactly right, and that's going to be your maximum absorption. The main reason this whole idea of empty stomach got started was that it allowed for the majority of the medication to get absorbed instead of some of it get bound up with the food that might happen if you were taking it with a meal. So it's about consistency, and if you're going to take your thyroid on an empty stomach, then do that, almost all the time, or as closely as possible, because that's where your doctor will then dial your dose in to how much is absorbing in your bloodstream over time on an empty stomach. However, if that's really a hardship and you're having a hard time getting that thyroid medication in on an empty stomach, you can take your thyroid medicine with your breakfast, but you need to do it the same way every day, and then have your blood test done when you've been taking it in that way. And then your doctor will adjust the dose so that you're adequately getting a dose that's appropriate. And you'll need generally a little higher dose if you're taking it with food than if you were taking it on an empty stomach. When we think about supporting the thyroid, if we think about the general things that will help us always optimize our thyroid function and help our thyroid heal, even so that over time maybe we don't need as much thyroid hormone, the main key points would be a nutritious diet and phytonutrients and minerals. The other parts of this list are all really about how we help minimize other stressors on our body. Being dehydrated is a stressor for the body, so getting adequate water actually helps the body flush toxins out that can inhibit our thyroid function. Exercise helps promote conversion of T4 into T3. Good sleep allows for restructuring and getting out more of the toxins out of our system, which then allows us to have better thyroid conversion. And stress management is huge. If there was one thing I could say, it's that stress management is probably the number one reason we end up with thyroid deficiency. When you look at the testing that's done for thyroid, usually, as we mentioned, we test TSH. I test a TSH free T3, a free T4, and a reverse T3. There are also some other autoantibodies and immune factors that we can check. So we'll check something called TPO, thyroid peroxidase, or autoantibodies to the thyroid gland to see if the autoimmune response is flaring and if we need to treat more vigorously because of that. Overall, the main thing I would say, though, is if we can manage our stress in any way by being more present and mindful, as we go through our days, that's probably the number one thing we could do that would preserve thyroid function. And then asking your doctor to check thyroid function so that you know if you are making T4 adequately and whether it's getting converted to T3 adequately, are other steps you could take to support normal thyroid function and then whole system health because of the thyroid's many effects on the rest of the body. Thank you for joining us. If you need help sorting these issues out for yourself, we welcome you at Exo Health. Exo Health is a functional medicine practice that supports people in achieving extraordinary health. And our phone number is 760-573-2761.